Hey, welcome. Today, we're going to tackle a huge topic, how the world completely fell apart, not just once, but twice in the span of only 30 years. We're going to trace the unbelievable chain reaction of the world wars, easily one of the most destructive chapters in all of human history.
I mean, that's really the big question, isn't it? This wasn't just a string of bad luck or a few random events. It was a cascade, a terrible domino effect where one disaster perfectly set the stage for the next one. And to really get how it all happened, we've got to go back to the very beginning. Long before the first shot of World War I was ever fired, the world at the start of the 20th century was, well, it was a powder keg. The great powers of Europe were bristling with new technologies, they had these ancient rivalries and huge, clashing ambitions. The world wasn't really at peace, it was just holding its breath, waiting for a spark. What's so wild here is how these four things created this perfect, vicious cycle. You had industrial factories that could suddenly pump out incredibly deadly new weapons, and that fueled a massive arms race. All the big empires were fighting over colonies for resources and, for bragging rights. And on top of it all, this wave of aggressive nationalism had convinced a lot of people that war was actually a good thing, a glorious way to prove your nation's strength. And this right here, this is the final crucial piece of the puzzle, the alliance system. Basically, Europe was split into two giant armed camps. Each side was bound by these treaties that promised they'd defend each other. The idea was to create a balance of power, but what it really created was a tripwire. One little conflict in some corner of Europe could now drag everyone into a massive war. And now we're going to see how all those tensions just exploded. That tripwire we just talked about, it was about to get yanked, and the result was going to be bigger and bloodier than anyone could have possibly imagined. The spark was the assassination of an Austrian archduke. And just look at this timeline. It's shocking how fast everything went downhill. In just over a month, that whole alliance system kicked in like a row of falling dominoes. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, so Russia starts mobilizing to protect Serbia. Then Germany declares war on Russia, and then France. And when Germany invades neutral Belgium to get to France, well, that pulls Great Britain in. And just like that, a regional dispute had become a world war. And this was a war like nothing anyone had ever seen before. All that industrial power that built the modern world was now being used to mass-produce death. Machine guns and artillery created this brutal, bloody stalemate which led to the absolute horror of trench warfare. So then they introduced new weapons like poison gas and tanks trying to break the deadlock, but all they really did was add to the unbelievable slaughter. And this is the result. Over 37 million casualties. It's a number so huge it's almost impossible to wrap your head around it. An entire generation of young men just gone. The war that everyone thought would be over by Christmas had instead carved this massive wound into the world that would poison it for decades to come. So, in 1918, the guns finally fell silent. But the peace that came after wasn't a real peace. It was more like a pause, one that was just filled with resentment and instability. And it was during this pause that the seeds for an even worse conflict were planted. A huge source of that instability was the Treaty of Versailles. And this part right here, the infamous war guilt clause, basically forced Germany to take all of the blame for the entire war. This was a massive national humiliation, and when you combine it with crippling financial payments and losing huge chunks of territory, it created this deep, dangerous well of anger and resentment. And that feeling of humiliation was supercharged by economic disaster. The war reparations absolutely crushed the German economy, leading to insane hyperinflation where money became worthless. Then, as if things weren't bad enough, the global Great Depression hit. In this climate of total despair, people got desperate for radical solutions. And that's when authoritarian leaders, who promised to restore national pride and offered up scapegoats for everyone's problems, found a dangerously receptive audience. Which brings us to the second and even deadlier act in this tragedy. See, World War II wasn't some totally new, separate event. It was a direct consequence of the First War. It was the catastrophic result of all that unresolved anger, the economic chaos, and the total failure of world leaders to stop aggression when they had the chance. This war was fought on a truly global scale, even bigger than the first. From the frozen-over ruins of Stalingrad, which finally stopped the Nazi advance in the east, all the way to the huge naval battles in the Pacific like Midway, which basically broke the back of the Japanese fleet, the fighting spanned the entire planet, and the human cost was just immense. But we have to be absolutely clear. Beyond the battlefields, this war had a uniquely modern and terrifying evil at its core: the systematic, industrialized genocide carried out by the Nazi regime against Europe's Jews and other minority groups.
The result was the murder of 6 million people. Let that number sink in. 6 million. It represents an almost unimaginable crime against humanity, and it remains a central, heartbreaking tragedy of the 20th century. So, after 30 years of just unparalleled destruction, what can we possibly take away from it all? Well, this brutal, terrible period offers some of the most critical and most difficult lessons in all of modern history. Okay, first we saw exactly how that rigid alliance system back in 1914 acted like a conveyor belt straight to war. A single assassination in a city most people hadn't heard of ballooned into a global catastrophe because all these nations were locked into these inflexible military pacts they couldn't get out of. Second, the link between economic misery and political extremism is just undeniable. The Great Depression created the perfect, fertile ground where movements like Nazism could take root, grow, and eventually seize power. Desperate people do desperate things. Third lesson, the terrifying leap in military technology. Think about it. The journey from the flimsy little biplanes of World War I to the atomic bombs that ended World War II, it shows that our ability to destroy ourselves grows exponentially with every new invention. Fourth, and this is a big one, we learned that good intentions are not enough. The League of Nations was created after World War I for the specific purpose of preventing another war. But it had no real power, no way to enforce its decisions. It had no teeth. So when aggressive nations started breaking the rules in the 1930s, the League was totally helpless to stop them. And finally, these wars completely redrew the map of the world. The old European empires crumbled, and a brand new world order emerged from the rubble. One that was dominated by two new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, which of course set the stage for the next great conflict, the Cold War. So from the tripwires of 1914 all the way to the atomic ashes of 1945, this chain reaction of conflict completely defined a century. It's a history that's just full of stark warnings about nationalism, about economic crisis, and about the failure of diplomacy. And the final, and maybe the most important question it leaves us with is, are we paying attention to those warnings today?